Hello, and welcome to PubShorts episode 111. I do not know, Tony, if you call it inauspicious, but in from because we are both influenced by the wonderful game of cricket. And in cricket, if you have a score which is 111 or its multiples, it's called Nelson and it's considered inauspicious. And it
Oh, is
was
that why it's called a Nelson? I didn't know that.
I do not know the answer, but it was made famous by the umpire, the late Dickie Bird. And anyway, that does not matter to anybody who's listening to this conversation. This is Pub Shots, and my name is Dr. KK, and I'm the innovation officer at Inago. And I have with me a smiling Tony who understands the futility of us talking about cricket on Pub Shots.
Hello. Yes, indeed. If you're a cricket fan, you should be watching another podcast, not this one. I'm Tony O'Rourke. Welcome to PubShorts. I'm VP for partnerships here with Inago. PubShorts is, in case this is the first time you're tuning in, is a podcast which KK and I record where we discuss news stories related to the world of academic research, whether it's AI, funding, technology, policy. And this particular week, and we like to give every episode a theme, and the theme linked around a song. This week's episode is called Talk, which is a song by Coldplay, which I think both KK and I are big fans of back at the time. So the song's message, Talk, is about connection and communication. And that fits this week's stories. Scientists find new ways to share results, rethink competition, and open up how research speaks to the world, and really the desperate need for transparency in scientific research.
Right. Thanks for the wonderful segue, because the first story that we talk about is related to the cultural shift that researchers should be going through. And what is it? It is titled Research Funders Urge to Drive Culture Shift on Negative Results. So in a nutshell, there are incentives, both from the funding and publishing point of view, to publish positive results. And conversely, negative results are not encouraged to be published. And that's a cultural shift that this article is arguing for. So the writers advocate that this culture shift is needed to improve the trust in science and patient care, so from a clinical medicine point of view. And it is also important for the training of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence, if given only positive data, obviously it won't give the right answer, because we need to have a balanced representation of the the results of a research question or research methodology. The paper also, the article also highlights the problem of publication bias, which I have already mentioned. Positive results are encouraged for publication, and this bias can lead to wasted resources, slow research progress, and distorted evidence. So negative results, the incentives must come from the society itself, but most importantly, Tony, from a funding point of view. But because if funders stop or discourage negative results from being published, and I've seen that in a lot of funding related information as well, then this is never going to happen. And so this article stresses on the lack of negative results being published, but also throws in the funder angle at the need for the funders to change policy. So your thoughts on this?
Yeah, listen, I'm not a scientist. I can't speak with any authority in terms of how one uses this content in terms of determining research. But as a lay person thinking about research generally, surely you need to understand why something hasn't worked in order to understand why something should work, and learn the lessons from others, so that those mistakes aren't being repeated, or those failures, or those negative results aren't necessarily being replicated. There is maybe the way the role for journals then changes. If the role for journals is only to demonstrate the public the positive result, there still needs to be a source, a place to go to understand all those places where they made those attempts but been unsuccessful, so you don't make those mistakes yourself.
Right. And one important point to note is that AI, artificial intelligence, might actually be helping us, at least in the fields where it can actually do the replicability aspects by looking at data sets alone, and may be able to create the negative results that we want. So that's one point. And also, this push to publish negative results is also keeping in line with the efforts of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, that is called DORA, and the EU-supported Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. So this is also interesting. I mean, I think the community should move towards this direction.
So just before we go on to the next story, I'm just thinking about all those times there have been these sort of accidental discoveries, in that have changed life. There's, like, for example, the discovery of penicillin.
Yeah.
All these accidental discoveries that have taken place that probably would have been deemed today as negative results, because they didn't achieve the original objective of the funded research.
Right. Tony, moving on to the next one. I'm not sure if you have covered the last year's or the previous perspectives on AI in scholarly communications
Oh
report
yeah, I've seen this. Yeah,
published by Springer Nature. So this is published obviously by Springer Nature, and I can guarantee you that this is an AI generated image. So that's interesting. So this is a discussion between libraries and publishing professional about AI in scholarly communication. So remember, the perspective is slightly different from other reports that we have seen in the last few weeks, that it focuses on libraries as well, which is important. And
yeah.
the author Saskia Steinacker,
Saskia Steinacker. Yeah,
yeah, highlights the need for AI to benefit the research ecosystem and adhere to principles of fairness, transparency, accountability, and respect. Fair, if you may, and it recommends strong partnerships between libraries and publishers as crucial for the responsible AI implementation. So there's a theme of responsible AI implementation, and I think to touch on it, basically, if AIs do not or not are not exposed to the content which is behind a paywall from publishers, that's one point. The other point is that if suppose libraries used to be the one sort of point of contact for all research for a research or a student, if that is not maintained in the new AI world, we have a problem, and that's why there needs to be a sort of a liaison or partnership between the publishers and the libraries. So it presents perspectives from interviews with library staff and Springer Nature's experts, and researchers are increasingly using AI. Everybody knows this, and there's a lot of data reported in terms of what is the percentage of use of AI and everything, and how AI is being used. And the most important point I would like to stop here, that libraries can evolve to become experts in AI tools and workflow solutions, supporting researchers and by validating information. So this is because you have experience in terms of dealing with libraries and librarians, and we've often discussed the challenges that libraries have in terms of funding, and with the AI taking away the sort of attention that libraries used to have. So considering this, I think it's a very I guess a relevant, pertinent report, and I wait for your thoughts on what I
uh,
just spoke about.
nothing particularly groundbreaking apart from the fact, organisations like Springer Nature, Elsevier, every publisher has been, I won't say reliant, but they have needed the role that the library plays in order to present and promote their content, make that content available in institutions. Libraries play in my mind, still an absolutely critical role in sort of curating and managing content that's available for research. But I think the role of the library is changing, has changed, is changing, and will continue to change and evolve to reflect some of these new technologies. Oh, by the way, that image is not. It may be AI assisted, but she's a real person.
No,
Saskia
no,
is a.
no. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that this has been put into AI and improved. I can see that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
possibly,
yeah,
yeah. But I've just while we were talking, I just did a quick Google search, and she's a real person.
Fact checking. Tony giving you an example of how to have to fact check in the
Exactly. Don't assume, just because we say it, don't assume it's true.
Especially when we say that what we say. Anyway, moving on to the next story. It's a cross-ref story, and I think, Tony, this might actually change the game, as far as I understand. So cross-ref is now a source of bibliographic metadata from preprints as well, and I'm aware of it, but I was not sort of subconsciously aware of it. But now that I've read this article, I see the significance. So many preprint servers have registered DOIs with Crossref, submitting metadata in the process, and this metadata is openly accessible for anybody who has access to Crossref data, and this
Yeah,
supports the push for open research information. Very
yeah,
important. We've talked about metadata. So the
yeah,
article analyzes the completeness of this preprint metadata in Crossref, focusing on reference lists, abstracts, or ORCIDs, affiliations, funding, and licenses. So, and data from January, I'm just trying to scroll to that particular point in the article, shows varying levels of completeness across different preprint servers and metadata types. So notably, Archive, Zenodo, and Figshare preprints are excluded as they use data site, and not Crossref or DOI. So reference list completeness varies greatly, with bioarchive and medarchive performing really well, while SSRN and others lag. And abstracts are generally well represented, with SSRN being a notable exceptions. ORCIDs, Tony, are present for most preprints, although SSRN and Research Square have gaps. So, moving on to author affiliations are less commonly submitted, and Research Square and Authoria showing higher completeness. There's some more information regarding this. So, the main point is that obviously this metadata is available, and this the importance of this metadata is what the authors emphasize by doing this sort of research, and they acknowledge resource constraints for preprint servers but suggest that basic metadata elements like abstracts, ORCIDs or ORCIDs and affiliation should be standardized and maintained even by the preprint staff. So I'm happy that the preprint servers from my field, bioarchive and medarchive, are leading the way, at least in some of the reference completion fields. But this is crucial because the preprints have an increasingly larger role to play in the ecosystem, and if you don't have metadata, clean metadata, and if you can access using this, then they can also be discoverable. So I'm excited about this. I'm happy that Crossref is doing it. I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Uh, not specifically this article, but just generally, I think, again, I know in the past we've spoken about what's my prediction for 2026. Well, my prediction for the next 5 years is we're going to see preprints really, really float to the top. There's always been this question mark in preprints around, because it's not peer reviewed, because it doesn't go through the same kind of rigor as the traditional journal model does, that there's questionable quality. And what I've discovered in the last couple of years is that there is rigor. There is a significant, in some cases, more rigor in terms of the checking process than with some academic journals, and things like this, as you rightly say, give an extra level of validation for preprint. So I think we already know that in certain areas, we've spoken about this before, KK, in certain areas like high energy physics, for example, astronomy, astrology. No, beg your pardon.
Yes.
Astrophysics, astrophysics, not astrology. I'm an Aquarius. The preprint is already the dominant source of information for any researcher. The first thing they look at and the last thing they turn off at night. So I think we're going to see more of that in other areas, and potentially affecting or changing the role that the journal plays. But wait and see. But it's just another validation for preprints.
Right. All right. So good news overall for the preprint ecosystem as well as for Crossref.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to the next one. Another sort of question from Nature News: is academic research becoming too competitive? So Nature is examining data. So it is the data related to European research grants in 2025. So the increased competition is particularly felt by early career researchers, and the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions (MSCA) postdoctoral fellowships show a 65% increase compared with to 2024, and with a success rate expected to drop below 10%. Now, 10% success rate in terms of funding is not too high or low for that matter, but at the same time it's dropping. That's a more important thing. The European Research Council ERC also reported a significant rise in applications in starting and advanced grants, and so some information is here. And Maria Leptin, the president of ERC, acknowledges the high demand but notes frustration due to limited funding. So the lack of funding or the lack of proportionate increase in funding is another point that is mentioned. And the overall thing is that it's because some of these are argued to be because of what's happening in the US. So that's how I'd like to bring it together. We have talked about the US federal administration and the funding implications in terms of cancellation or sort of locking of the fundings, and that could have resulted, or that is likely to have resulted, in increase in grant applications in the European Union. So the ripple effect of what's happening in the US across the Atlantic is what we're talking about, and I think this is going to have a lasting consequence in terms of how research will be shaped in the coming decade or so. Your thoughts?
I can't say any more, Keiko. I mean, my only comment really is that the article asks whether there's over competition or in research. As a layperson, I want the best research to be funded. I want the best research ideas to be supported. But clearly, there isn't enough money to go around. So sometimes difficult decisions have to be made.
Right, and I agree with that. I disagree with the question. I think the title is not quite. It's a rhetorical question in the sense that there needs to be competition. There needs to be people fighting for the for funding, because that's how we can have quality control, at least at that stage. So I disagree with the. I mean, you cannot answer that question, and I agree with your point, Tony.
And at the end of the day, the European Commission isn't the only source of funding.
Right. And moving on to the next one, another from Nature Biomedical Engineering. This one might actually be quite more accessible to all of us. It is an editorial published in Nature Biomedical Engineering titled "The Ever-Changing Communication of Scientific Discovery." So I don't know about you, Tony, but I'm historically inclined to understand how the academic publishing industry has shaped itself. And so this article sort of takes us through how scientific communication started with letters, and then it went on to experimental reports. And I'm surprised, or rather, I did not know this, that the materials and methods section was developed reproducibly. That later on, it was not original section and the IMRAD format.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the first methods and methodology journals didn't appear until the
yeah.
1950s.
Yeah, so now the main sort of, I think the main takeaway from this is that the text in a research article, right? We don't have the constraints of a printed page, or we don't have to worry about that anymore as much. So hence the text or the articles are becoming longer, and longer means it takes longer to read, especially from a human reading point of view. But
Yeah,
that comes with the sort of advantage. If you have a long article, you have more data, you have more transparency, you have more potential replicability. So you have to balance the sort of length, the advantages and the disadvantages. And
and so there used to be practical disadvantages as well. A lot of publishers up until not that long ago used to set page word count limits on articles, and or they also used to set they used to make page charges,
right.
because they say, yeah, well, you can send us a longer article, but you've got to, if you do anything beyond this minimum, you've got to pay XX per word per page, and that could often, be in the hundreds or even thousands of dollars.
Right.
So it was a practical restraint as well as an academic one.
Right. If suppose you're wondering why articles are becoming longer, you can argue that editorially, or from an author point of view, I mean, an author, a writer editing themselves, the basic aspect of editing is basically trimming, right, Tony, to use more concise expressions to communicate. Basically, add the information density in anything that you write. So, is that being lax, and is that becoming lax because of the publish or perish culture? Is another argument that the article can
Well,
consider.
there is that, and of course, there is also that desire by publishers not to, kind of see salami sliced research
Right.
being presented. Again, if I go back to my journal publishing days, wouldn't be unusual to see a research project with 5 or 6 different papers, one on the theory, one on the experiment, one on the actual findings, one on the methodology. There'd be 5 or 6 different papers that would summarize one piece of research. What publishers want is they want one good, solid piece of research that reflects the entire process,
Right.
which in itself will lead to longer articles, unfortunately. But
Right.
also the fact they're electronically available should make it possible.
Right, and it also continues to sort of discuss the future, the very, I get, immediate future, where the article is written by AI mostly, and with human overview, also processed by AI and is consumed through AI. We have talked about it in the previous episode. That's up and coming, and there's probably no denying that. And also mentions the exploration of new formats by different institutions, like the sharing of computational notebooks like Jupyter Notebook. It is very common in the coding circles, computer science circles, and living reviews, continuously updated reviews. So these are modern formats, and I guess we have also talked about the static PDF, and we've shared our thoughts on it. So overall, it's a nice perspective here, especially if you're interested in historical sort of evolution of the scientific article, and if suppose and where it's going. So please read it. And Tony, any further thoughts to share on this?
No, not at all. It's
Yeah.
a fascinating article.
Yeah. All right. Going to quick hits. We have, I think, 5 or 6. So let's go through them quickly. The first one: Research for Life and Clocks partner to link access with preservation. We have talked about in, I think, 50 episodes ago why article preservation is very important. Also, metadata preservation, signal preservation, and that is enabled by organizations like the Clocks, right? I mean, Tony, you can probably expand on it. So,
Yeah.
Research for Life is now collaborating or partnering with Clocks to ensure many institutions that are part of it, primarily from the global south, if I'm not mistaken, is getting this sort of access to Clocks' information preservation, which eventually would lead to more DEI in terms of representation of information as well. So, do you want to quickly explain how Clocks does what it does?
Yeah, so again, there's Clocks, there's Portico, there are a number of places which have been developed over the last, I'd say, probably the last 25 years,
Mm.
which intends to preserve research for the future. Its goal is to preserve research for the future. So, if an article is published today in a journal, and in 10 years' time, that journal has disappeared, what clocks will do will, rights permitting, make that piece of content available, provide a persistent DOI
Right.
to ensure that that piece of content is available. Portico does the same thing, with a slightly different model. I can't remember what clocks stand for. It's something like lots of copies keep stuff safe. It's something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I forget.
Uh,
We originally had this expanded somewhere, but this is
yeah,
very very important, very interesting point that you mentioned, Tony. And what I also want to clarify that there are two aspects to this. One is access and preservation, and Research
yeah,
for Life takes care of the, let's say, the DEI of all of this. And with
yeah.
partnering with Clocks, this is an important thing. So, could I ask you, Tony, if Clocks is like the Wayback Machine for academic papers?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that.
All right.
Um, but the really important thing to stress about this, and
Mm,
this is a publisher initiative. This is most largely, not exclusively, but largely funded by publishers who are investing in. It's like an insurance policy in their future.
got it.
It's to say, look, if you as an institution are licensing my content, um, because we are within the clocks program, you can be assured that the money that you're spending today won't be wasted in 10 years' time should we disappear for any reason, because it can happen. Journals might close, publishers might merge or disappear.
Yeah.
But that DOI, that object will still appear thanks to the great work that Clocks and Portico and others do, and it's largely funded by publishers.
Yeah. And talking about other partnerships, Signals and ImageTwin are partnering. So what does that mean? Research integrity checks with image integrity checks coming together in the Signal. So that's an interesting thing. And if you remember, Tony, the last week we talked about, or last couple of episodes, we talked about image manipulation detection sort of aligning itself with research integrity on one hand, as well as for
Yeah,
plagiarism check. So
yeah.
an interesting shift. I think it's very good for the researcher to have a single sort of point where they can get all the signals that they need to ensure that their manuscript is research integrity wise. Okay, now a couple of stories.
And so one
Yeah.
thing I would add also, KK, is that these image detection services are great, but there is still a requirement for human oversight in some cases,
Right.
and that's one of the services that we provide to publishers. Is you can probably catch 95% of manipulated images through these tools, but when you've got that 5%, and that can be large volumes, at risk, or you were unsure about, you still need that expert oversight. And that's the kind of, we have that human overlay role that we offer to publishers.
And if somebody is interested in knowing more about this human
Just
overlay,
contact me directly.
right?
Tonio@nargo.com. I'll be happy to put you in touch with the right team.
Yeah, or maybe you can find some some preliminary information about it by searching for Inago publication support packs, and you'll find it.
Absolutely.
Right, right.
Absolutely.
All right, Tony, I think I gave you a hint that as to why I was not, or rather, LSE used to be one of my favorites, and I'll tell you why. But before that, I had to take care of a couple of retraction watch article. The first one, sleuth loses paper for duplicate publication after flagging hundreds of untrustworthy articles. So this is a simple case where somebody who's genuinely reported, let's say, research integrity issues has been a target, and by potentially people who have been sort of outed in terms of research integrity concerns, and has basically those people have charged against this researcher's work, and which was a genuine overlook, apparently a related version of an article in a different language. If I'm not mistaken, it was in Vietnamese Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. A version of the paper was published without the knowledge of the sleuth themselves, and obviously they have provided explanation. They admit to the fact that it should not have happened, but it's a genuine overlook. But I can imagine a world where, if suppose you are doing the forensics of finding out, okay, what is happening, let's say with paper mills, then you might get targeted in terms of potential research integrity concerns that you may have overlooked being outed, which is not a good thing, but it's a classical human society like a phenomenon when this happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Moving on to the next related story, another article from Retraction Watch. Exclusive, Iraqi university forcing students to cite its journals to graduate. Now, I don't want to mention the name of the university, but the main point is that I would argue from the global south, where in education, research infrastructure and research education is weaker, there might be policies or, let's say, directives from the institutions that may force people into doing a potential research integrity concern or research, let's say, misconduct, right? And this is an example of it. And I'm saddened by the fact that it's coming from the global south and from the Middle East. But at the same time, this is something that everybody needs to be aware of. If suppose you have watched this episode, please take a look at what your institution says. And if suppose it says something like this, which is obviously a research misconduct, then you have to raise your voices against it. Any further
Yeah, I
thoughts?
mean, not being, I'm not a cynical person naturally, but I think this is clearly a case. I would hope this is clearly a genuine case of a university in perhaps a less well-funded part
Mm-hmm.
of the world that's saying that we understand the rules of the game here. You know, it's about visibility, it's about being seen to provide impact. Our research that we're funding provides impact. So unfortunately, they've taken this particular route of saying, look, okay, and one of the ways we can do that is by you, our researchers, making sure you cite our journals, and clearly that's wrong. But I wonder if they realised that was actually the case, that was actually wrong, or it was a genuine case of, look, we need to do whatever we can do to honestly and genuinely raise the profile of a journal. We invest in our journals. You know, it would just take a good consultant to go over there, spend some time, and go and work through that ecosystem with them to understand what they need to change and tweak in order to
Got it.
make sure this doesn't happen again.
Excellent.
I do think genuinely that this is just a kind of a misunderstanding of how the global system works.
Right, right. Thanks for that insight, Tony. And I mentioned that there's a reason why I did not do LSC articles too many in the last, or we did not do, and that's because journalogy has been in hiatus, and it is back now. It is back on Substack, and it's better than ever. And I'm so happy. Journalogy, I think Tony, you would agree with me. That's one of my recommended reads for anybody in the
Yeah,
academic publishing
yeah,
system.
absolutely.
Like this call,
It's one of two or three absolutely must read
right?
sources.
So James Butcher, an acquaintance now, is writes about why things took longer, but eventually it is on Substack, and the reason why you have more articles from Retraction Watch and LSE is because he updates his newsletter with all the relevant articles. So thank you, James
Yeah,
Butcher. But please follow James Butcher's Substack if you're interested in keeping up with what's happening in academic publishing. Like how I would recommend that you follow PubShorts, as Tony will explain how you can do that on YouTube. And the last piece of information, last quick hit, is related to podcast, Tony. Did you know this?
good.
Podcasts are now included in alt metric scores, and I purposefully kept it as the last one. It's obvious if your research gets mentioned in a podcast and it somehow gets indexed, you will get brownie points in an alt metric scoring system.
And if there's a role for alternative metrics, here we are again. This is another good example how this technology can be put to really, really good use. Because as you rightly say, the way research is being communicated now has changed over the last 20 years, and you need to find ways to be able to measure that.
And Tony, may I tell you that I honestly, genuinely believe that our podcast PubShot mentions, including the fact that we put all the URLs for all the research papers that we discuss, are already contributing to this. So I'm kind of sort of proud of the fact that we are contributing to the science communication for a research from a researcher point of view. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm very
What do you
happy.
think? We've recorded something like 111. Dear viewer, we have recorded 111 episodes. And in each episode we talk normally about somewhere between 8 and 10 stories. So we've talked about more than 1,000 stories over the last 12 months. And if that's not a way of being able to promote good science, I don't know what is. Good research. I don't know what don't know what is.
Yeah, and talking about promoting good science and promoting PubShots, where can they find the 110 articles and maybe potentially 1,100 research articles or related news items?
Yep. So give yourself a couple of days to watch all 110 previous episodes. You just need to go over to YouTube, search for the Inago PubShorts playlist, and you'll find that on YouTube. We encourage you to follow us and like the channel and share with colleagues, and also to send us your suggestions for topics for future episodes.
Excellent. And when you do that, we'll try to take into account everything that you say, including if you want Tony or I to probably wear costumes for Halloween. Is that a thing, Tony, you were planning to do?
I absolutely won't do that, KK. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right. So,
I'm not a big fan of Halloween. But
uh,
that's a story for another day.
yeah, yeah, that's okay. I mean, it was just a mention. Okay, okay, we won't do any costumes. But anyway, on that lighter note, we have to bring this episode to a close. So this was Pop Shots episode 111, titled Talk, and we will see you. Tony and I will see you in the next one. And until then, this is goodbye from KK, and bye, Tony.
Talk over.